Hello, I'm Britt Udison, Executive and Artistic Director at the Loft Literary Center. Welcome to this live stream at Virtual Wordplay. I'm so glad you're here with us. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what brought us here today. For the last year, the Loft staff has been working hard to put together an outdoor book festival that would have gathered 100 authors with 10,000 visitors in our neighborhood in downtown Minneapolis. As COVID-19 hit, we knew we had to think about everything we do differently, especially this festival. While we were disappointed that we wouldn't be able to gather in person, we became even more committed to supporting writers, celebrating new books, and finding new ways to assert the connective power of the written word. In a time of anxiety, we want to offer a powerful event for readers, writers, and booksellers. When we first approached our sponsors, their first question was, what is a virtual festival? And to be honest, we didn't know. Our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune, agreed to make a leap of faith with the Loft. With courage, generosity, and vision, they have worked alongside us to figure out what this virtual festival might become. We are grateful to our sponsors and donors. Their generosity is incredible, but it is not enough. We believe it is essential, especially during a health and financial crisis, to offer programs that are free and accessible to all, but that has led to a significant revenue loss. A live event would have included ticket revenue, beer sales, exhibitor fees, and additional sponsorships. The Loft is not closed. We continue to offer classes, fellowships, conversations, support for readers and writers in addition to this festival. We are here to support the literary community, and we ask that you continue to support us. If you are able, please consider making a contribution to the Loft today. Thank you for being here.
Hello, I'm Major Jackson, and it is such a pleasure to join the Lost Wordplay Literary Stretch Break. I want to thank the Wordplay sponsors, St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune. I'm the author of 5 books of poetry, most recently The Absurd Man, which I will read from today. And I'll read about 4 or 5 poems, time permitting, and then our friend at the Loft, Rachel Young, will take some and facilitate some questions. But I really want to thank you for joining us today. I'm going to start with a poem called Double Major from this volume. And this collection, the speaker in the poems are very, very self-conscious about the fact that this is a collection of poems. The speaker reflects on the process, contemplates the role of poetry in society, and maybe even more so now. This is the last poem in the collection. It's called Double Major. I emerge whenever he confuses the lamp for a moon. It is then he thinks of fine bindings and ordered Athenaeums. I own his face, but he washes and spends too little time behind his ears. He sees me in the mirror behind thick clouds of shaving cream, then suddenly believes in ghosts. His other selves are murals in the cave of his mind. They are speechless, yet large. They stare his wishes like summer rain and amplify his terrors like newscasters. What he doesn't know, his dreams are his father's dreams, which are his grandfather's dreams, and so on. They possessed a single wish. He knocks repeatedly on the bolted door to his imagination. Tragically, he believes he can mend his wounds with his poetry, and thus I am his most loyal critic. He trots me out like a police dog. He calls out thirst for pads and pencils, destiny. Our voices come together like 2 wings of a butterfly. On occasion, he closes his eyes and sees me. I am negative capability. The test to all men are created equal. We are likely to dance at weddings against my will. He pulled out the same moves writing this poem, a smooth shimmy and a hop. This page is a kind of looking glass, making strange whatever stone carvings he installed along the narrow road to his interior. I suffer in silence, wedded to his convictions. He would like to tell you the truth about love, but we are going to bed. To bed. Nothing to see here. Move along is the title of this next poem. All through my days, elaborate silken rays coming through screens carrying its own occult. I am in the habit of questioning love, which is a storm of rare light, silvering spider webs in a sacred forest. The silent clock in the town square, the heavy footprints of the homeless, the museum we do not enter. So when I say I've subdued the stallions raging in my blood, know that I travel here only to watch the sparrowhawk flying low over Marl Prairie, to take in the sedge wren's flits and jukes like teenagers learning a new dance. I'm here guarding my freedom, rubbing my hands over yesterday's fires. A couple summers ago, I was in Paris when France was playing in the World Cup and won. It was a hot summer, but a very joyous one in a lot of ways. This is titled, Now That You Are Here, I Can Think. What you really are is felt, the mainland of your feelings, a young Veronica Webb, and what we share are solutions, and not so much the Parisian air you tired of, nor the fat, sweaty beads coursing a décolletage, an unlikely result of the Kyoto Protocol, but the pleasures of lounging below French-style windows, opened wide as arms, whose blousy curtain is a shawl that formally hangs and informally shifts when you drift into the room like a Spike Lee dolly shot. The kids are dancing to some Ariana, but I'm watching what you do with your lips when reading silently around 4:22 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. I have a weakness for marble winding stairs and tight two-person elevators. But the brasseries are waiting, as well as the football fans who need help cheering, for we are Americans after all, and are ready to hype even the locusts on the day of judgment. I don't care about the midfielder or the winger. You're smiling, and that's all the defending I'll ever need. And my last poem will be a new poem titled Invocation. I haven't been writing too much since self-isolation, but I do have these favorite moments late at night when I'll contemplate the particular challenges that we face and how life might change afterwards. To some extent, I believe some of what were yesterday's headlines seem insignificant to this massive shift in our lives. Invocation. Down here, we've inherited an arcade of stars and want kindness that can stop a bomb. We want intelligence that survives mutations. No more rallies of hates in stone mountains, just proliferating peaks in the presence of friends like magical wands. We want the father in the park running behind a child, pedaling into her future. We want to turn a corner and stumble upon the muted concert of two people in an embrace with entangled eyes. We want to hear a faraway train whistle cast a spell on the coming night. Back in that faraway land, we were nurtured once on a dance floor, blazing in some tribal purity, probably near some bride, probably swirling and sweaty laughter as we reach for each other's fingers, streaming its ambient light. Such were the new births of ourselves, breaching horizons like a sting. This is not the ending we imagined. We want to see each other again. Strangers walking through curtains of rain, storms lighting up pastures laden with blossoms. That's a new poem. Okay, now I'll take some questions, and Rachel Young will read them to me and moderate this a little bit.
Well, thank you so much, Major. This was so great. Thank you for reading old and new work. It's been so fun to hear. Our first question comes from Aoife, who asked, why did you write your book? And I guess it's a double question. So why did you write your book? And what is your favorite memory or moment while writing?
I wrote the book because I am obsessed with I have a restless imagination, and writing allows me to kind of contemplate some of the strange imagery that I collect, engage in memories from maybe a couple years ago, for example, hanging out in a brasserie. But mainly, particularly this book, I very seriously had to contend with the unfortunate reality of suicide and return to some writers, among them Albert Camus, and his particular essay collection, The Myth of Sisyphus. And yet I did not want the book to carry that kind of weight. So I wanted to write a lighter book that talked about the anxieties that we live with. What role does society play when we contemplate the end of life? And it was a fun book. My favorite memory writing the book, I would say, was writing the opening poem called Major and I, which was a fun poem to write because I had to contemplate, as Whitman says, we contain multitudes, and I was curious about the various selves that emerge when I sit down and write a poem. And it turns out my alternate self is far more formal than I am. And my writerly self likes to be a little wilder. So writing poems becomes a means by which I can explore the various dimensions and contemplate existence, as big as that sounds.
It is big, profound. I like that. I like the idea that poetry can be a source of play and a source of maybe joy, particularly right now. And we have a question about that actually from VT, who asks, what do you find absurd about the poet and the act of writing poetry, especially given our current state?
Right. Well, what's absurd about the poet is every poem becomes Sisyphus' boulder moving up the mountain. To some extent, writers develop a voice and a style and maybe even claim subject matter. But writing a new poem, you're faced with the blank page, like other writers will kind of talk about. And you have to show up. You have to sit there and allow yourself to be bored, possibly even sitting there, until something hooks. And then you're kind of chasing this inner voice or memories. You're chasing associations, or you're paying close attention to a sound. In a way, you're haunted. And even if you find yourself on the other side by poem's end, partially satisfied with what you've written, you have no sense about how that piece of literary art is going to exist in the world. And that is very absurd. Nothing makes it even more profoundly mysterious than moments of crises when one has to contemplate the responsibility of maybe helping out a neighbor. But I strongly believe that poetry has a place in our world. In fact, there's a spiritual dimension to it all, because we writers, artists are giving voice to the times very deliberately. So I find it to be actually a calling along the level of economists and care workers. We are documenting a moment that will give voice to how we handled and dealt with and contended with the loss of life, contended with the uncertainty, the doubt, the mystery of this moment. So, yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. We have another question from Anna, who says, in what ways do you think writing your previous poetry books prepared you to write this one?
These are very good questions. I'm gonna use that that highly populist idea of 10,000 hours. I'm gonna invoke that to some extent. Experience, I should say, has allowed both writing and experience off the page, has made the run around the block slightly easier. However, the material cannot be predicted. And so writing for me has been so much about discovery, writing towards the unknowable or the unknown. That's been a deep pleasure. And I would say along those lines, I find not too much to give me that distinct experience. When I was younger, there was a lot more flailing and a lot more purposefulness. That's still there, but added to this particular moment, there's a limberness that of language, and also a restlessness that I mentioned earlier. I want to stay in that.
Nice. We've touched on this a bit, but DB asks, what are some of the unexpected ways the pandemic has impacted your creativity?
I find myself at times, like I mentioned earlier, kind of favorite moments of writing, mainly because I am on pins and needles of not necessarily about my situation, but family and their well-being is of primary concern. And it seems to me that something is emerging from this particular moment. There seems to be a dearth or an abundance, I should say, of care. And thus, as a result, the writing isn't secondary. It's kind of turtling along, but my concerns right now are my family and my friends. But when it comes, it's a moving moment. I feel like that last poem, I felt like I needed to say this within the larger framework of our anxieties about this moment. So it's not necessarily hampered, but it is tough. It is tough writing. And I've spoken to other friends about it who have these I don't want to say call them writing blocks, but there seems to be other matters that are impinging upon their attention.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess just as a final question, thinking about all the stresses on our creative minds right now and our usual creative processes, I wonder if, in addition to your book of poetry, which really captures this idea of finding joy in something, even when feeling that there's a kind of an uphill battle with it, maybe. What are some other books, movies, albums, films, things that have been bringing you that kind of sense of joy creatively, either finding solace in just consuming them or finding some creative inspiration in them.
Mm-hmm. I've been reading a number of new books, as well as returning to some old favorites. I just read this weekend a book that I want to help promote is Mark Bibben's The 13th Balloon, which is a wonderful book about losing a friend. It's a book-long poem about losing a friend to the AIDS epidemic. And to read those poems in light of this particular moment is giving me some understanding about the emotional weight of loss that people are carrying right now. I'll also say that I've been returning to the films of Ingmar Bergman, who kind of answers the questions of loneliness and unknowability visually, but the writing is exquisite. Wonderful to return to his movies. New collected poems of Lawrence Joseph, which also just came out, and my friend Edward Hirsch, I recommend his new book, Rachel Eliza Griffith. I've just been reading mainly because I get a number of advanced reader copies, but also new books. And it's just, I find this to be, interestingly enough, and immensely, it's sad because there are a number of new books that are being published. And, Wordplay was launching the Loft was launching its wonderful book festival, only for these books to be in the shadow of this pandemic. But it's been consoling to read these books. So I want to just recommend and hold those names up, and as well as others, and Victoria Chang and Monica Sock and so many others, Karen McCadden. I can go on and on, but please buy books that are being published this season.
And of course, your own. Our audience can buy.
Major Jackson's
Our audience can buy Major Jackson. Yeah, The Absurd Man. You can find the link if you're watching on Crowdcast. It's right down here, I think, somewhere. And the link is also on our website. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, just go visit our website and you can purchase our book. You can purchase Major Jackson's The Absurd Man through our website.
Our book.
Through our bookshop link. A book for us all. Well, Major, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for reading these poems and for answering these really lovely questions from our audience.
Yeah.
And thanks to all of you for tuning in. And you can catch more Wordplay events this week. We have a packed week, and this was a fabulous way to start it off. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
These events are coming at you. You can find them on our website, on our social media, and the Loft Wordplay is sponsored and presented by the Star Tribune and St. Catherine University. Catch us for more events this week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.